Good afternoon, everyone. This is Fletcher Harper with GreenFaith. We're about 4 or 5 minutes away from starting our webinar. Thanks so much to those of you who've joined us. You're in the right place, and we'll get started soon. Hi, Gopal.
Hey, Fletcher. How are you?
Okay, how are you doing?
Good, thanks. Good.
Good. For those of you who have just logged on, welcome. You're in the right place. We're going to be getting started in just a couple of minutes with the webinar. We have our panelists joining us momentarily. So please hold on. You're in the right place.
Oh, that's a nice picture. Hello. Hey, Gopal.
Hey, Nettie. How are you?
Hey, very good. Hi, guys.
Great.
Hi, Nettie.
Hello. So you want our faces, right?
Correct.
Just
Yep.
to make sure. Okay.
Yep. And we've got about 25 people listening right now, and I'm
Great.
hoping that Nana and Irene will join us momentarily, and we can get started.
Perfect.
Hello again to everybody who's on the line. We're just about 2 minutes away from getting started. Thanks so much for joining us. Hi there, Irene.
Hi. Turn the phone off.
Just waiting for Nana, Irene. We have about 30 people on the line, and so we'll get started as soon as Nana arrives. Great. Nana, are you able to hear us?
Yes.
Good.
Can you hear me?
We can, yep. Will we get to see you?
Yes.
There we go. All right.
Organize myself.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. And we're going to start right away because we've just got a half hour for our webinar today. I'm Fletcher Harper with GreenFaith, and I'd like to welcome you here to this webinar where we're going to give a brief report back about the climate negotiations that just took place in Bonn, Germany. You have here on screen 5 of the 6 members of our team who were in Bonn. And I wondered just very briefly if we could introduce ourselves. Maybe do Gopal, Nettie, Irene, and then Nana. Introduce yourselves in that order.
Sure. So I'm Gopal Patel. I run a Hindu climate initiative called the Bhumi Project, and I'm based out of Oxford, England.
Hello, and I'm Nadia Astudillo. I coordinate outreach efforts in Latin America for GreenFaith, and I'm a Presbyterian pastor here in the U.S.
Hi, I'm Nana Freeman. I'm here in California, in Riverside, and I'm organizing the Outreach for Muslim, and I'm also the co-founder of the Global Muslim Climate Network.
Irene, you're muted.
Hi. I'm Irene Woodard. I'm on the GreenFaith board. I'm a Shambhala Buddhist, and I'm located in New Paltz, New York.
Great. So on this webinar, the only person missing from our team is our senior advisor, Imam Safet Katovic. He'll be on the version of the webinar this evening. So on this webinar, we'll give you an overview of the context for the climate negotiations and try to give you a little bit of a flavor of what happened at the negotiations and an update on our plans for the coming year. So to start with the context, Gopal, would you start us off with the context?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Fletcher. So, everyone's heard of the Paris Agreement, and that's been ushered in, and agreed on by every country in the world, except the United States up until now. And so what is the Paris Agreement from 2015? Basically, the Paris Agreement says that countries have to work together to try to limit global temperature rises by 2 degrees, but push for making sure those rises don't rise above 1.5 degrees. And so that's that rise has to be before the end of this century and compared to pre-industrial levels. So really, global temperature rises by the end of this century have to stay below 1.5 degrees compared to pre-industrial levels. What we see right now is that temperature rise has gone up by 1 degree. So if you're talking about a carbon limit or a carbon budget, we have very little wiggle room within that in order to make sure that we only get to 1.5 degrees. But so what does that look like? If we have a warming planet, what are the impacts? What are the implications to our life, to our health, well-being of the planet? Well, we can see right now what's happened this year. In America, we had devastating natural disasters. We had major hurricanes that devastated parts of Texas, Florida, and Puerto Rico. I mean, I was in America during that time. I'm sure many of you were as well, and saw how devastating those natural disasters were. In Puerto Rico today, over half the island's population, 3.5 million people, still do not have access to electricity. And what we're finding now in Puerto Rico is that many of the residents are suffering mental health issues because of the trauma they had going through that experience of the hurricane hitting Puerto Rico. In India, where we do a lot of work through my organization, this year, India, Bangladesh, and Nepal suffered one of the worst monsoon seasons on record, and over 1,200 people died in floods across those 3 countries. At one point, 2/3 of Bangladesh was underwater. And that's just devastating for that part of the world. What that means is that people's homes are washed away, power lines are cut down, bridges collapse, infrastructure is destroyed, and farmland is ruined as well through topsoil erosion. It's really devastating, that level of flooding in those parts of the world. And so therefore, to reach that 1.5 degrees, we really need to have a rapid reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in a significant way very, very quickly by 2050. I mean, just thinking about that, to think of how much we need to reduce our carbon emissions by 2050, just the thought of that task is overwhelming. But it's really important that we recognize our collective and individual responsibilities to do that and ensure that work to achieve that goal happens on every level, from governments to individuals to households. We all need to ensure that we reach that 1.5 degrees. Anything above that, if we stay on the current trajectory of 3 degrees or more, we're going to see increasing natural disasters as we have over the last year or so.
Thanks, Gopal. And I think in terms of with that context, Nettie, why don't you share with everybody a little bit about the COP itself, about Fiji, what it meant for Fiji to be the host, so that everybody gets a sense of that.
So each year, the climate talks are hosted by a different country. And this year, the Pacific Island nation of Fiji was the one in charge of hosting the talks. But Fiji does not have the capacity to host an event this size, so the COP was held in Bonn in Germany. Now, the presence and context of Fiji was felt throughout the COP. And the voices of the people, their stories were clearly heard. All around the COP venues was decorated with beautiful and enormous photos of scenes from around Fiji. And they also had a very large delegation. So it was easy to feel that in some ways we were in Fiji. But also the climate reality of Fiji with its immense beauty alongside the tragic stories of rising sea levels the stories of forced migration, the threat to their ocean environment and societal structures, the disappearance of cultures and communities that need to move because of the rising of the seas, the disappearance of traditions. We really felt this reality to be, in one side, inspiring because of its beauty, but also guiding and carrying the talks and our actions at the COP. And one of such voices that I wanted to bring up, which moved me very deeply, was that, and we all heard, was from Reverend James Bawan, a Methodist pastor from Fiji. He said that as we come together, we are fixing our ecological, economic, and ecumenical mats so the earth can have abundant life. And he was speaking about the mats that are also decorated, the different venues around the COP. These mats in Fiji are the places where people sit to tell stories, and to maintain their culture, and to also hear and express their concerns as to what may be happening in the community. And on these mats, the voices of all people, all ages, all genders are heard, and important voices. So he said that in Fiji, if the mats break, which are carefully kneaded with leaves of a special grass that grows in Fiji, he said, they're not thrown away. These mats are not thrown away. They are fixed. So he left us with the task of fixing the mats in our communities, ecological, economic, and ecumenical mats, so the earth can have abundant life. So from his view, this is what we were doing in Bonn, and this is what we understand that we need to continue doing. In Bonn particularly, it was discussed how to provide Fiji and all the other small island states and climate vulnerable nations the resources that they need for the loss and damages they are sustaining or will sustain that may enable them to make a necessary transition to their new homes or to adapt when they can. As in previous years, unfortunately, these negotiations continue to move very slowly. But we plan to continue advocating to firm commitments from the global north to help small islands and climate vulnerable states to make the changes that they need to make.
Great, thanks, thanks, Nettie. And for those who are on the line, if you'd like to share a question, please feel free to use the chat function, which you'll see when you move your cursor around it's right along the bottom of the screen in the form of a little speech bubble. And if you click on that, it'll give you the ability to send us a question, and we'll do our best to respond. So Gopal, back to you for a moment. There are some important sort of timetable issues with the process of the climate negotiations, and also some new considerations about some technologies that are starting to get more attention. Maybe just a few words about that before we turn to Irene and to Nana to share with us about an initiative that we were really excited to launch at the COP.
Yeah, definitely happy to share. So when the Paris Agreement was formulated, and I mentioned earlier, countries were asked to make their commitments. It was accepted that the collective commitments aren't enough to keep temperature rises below 1.5 degrees. And so within the Paris Agreement, there's this mechanism called the facilitative dialogue. And what that means is that every couple of years or every few years, the countries come together and renew and hopefully increase their commitments. And so the next facilitative dialogue takes place next year in 2018 in Poland, in December, early December. And that's a time where we hope countries will increase their commitments by what they want to do by 2020. So really this next year is very crucial for us, because we're seeing that temperature rises are rising significantly, and countries in a year's time are going to recommit how much they want to do to reduce carbon emissions from their own countries. So that's it's a very critical period in that respect. In terms of the technologies that you mentioned, there's a lot of talk now around some really troubling developments from industry and other sectors. People are advocating for technologies which are really unproven and quite scary. Some of these technologies include capturing carbon in the environment and then storing it underground or other places, removing carbon from the atmosphere through certain vacuums and things like that. People are also talking about spraying the atmosphere with certain particles which deflect the sunlight, so the sunlight goes back into space rather than coming down here on Earth. Really kind of like crazy, what we'd say in England, bonkers kind of ideas. And the trouble with these technologies is first that they're unproven. They haven't been proven on the scale that we would need them to work to address the issue. But also, it takes away any responsibility that we have to address this issue. Basically, what this is saying is that, we have the technology to solve all these issues, so we don't need to do anything. We can keep emitting the carbon we are at the current rate and increasing that. And the technology is just going to deflect the sunlight back out. It's going to, suck all the carbon out of the atmosphere. It's just, it is absolutely bonkers, as we would say. And so it's really troubling that people are talking about this in a very serious way. So given the fact that the next 12 months is crucial in terms of getting countries to increase their commitments, and conversations on what this is called geoengineering are increasing, I think it's more important than ever for us as faith communities to talk about these issues and really press our governments to increase their commitments in Poland next year, and really show that faith communities are concerned and committed about this issue, and that we're not going to let our governments and businesses, to that matter, continue with how they have been up until now.
Great, thanks, thanks, Gopal. And one of our participants sort of said in a question about hasn't some spraying of particles into the upper atmosphere started already? And actually, this month there is one of the first experiments that's taking place outside of the laboratory that's happening in the desert southwestern region of the U.S. Where there's some experimentation going on about that. So it hasn't started at any meaningful scale, but it's underway. And to add to what Gopal said, the truly frightening thing about these technological interventions is that the scientists, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, having done the math, having looked at emissions trajectories, is very clear that we are way, way behind where we need to be in terms of bending the emissions curve to a sustainable level. And their position is that without some form of technological intervention, we have no hope of achieving the 1.5 or even the 2 degree goal. And that really serves as a good segue into a description of an initiative that we launched in Bonn, that we think represents a really important piece of the picture. It's not a silver bullet, because there is no one single silver bullet with climate change. But what we're going to talk about now, and what Irene and Nana will talk about, is sort of a multi-faith sustainable lifestyle initiative, which in many ways harkens right back to the roots of the religious environmental movement for many of us who've been around this for a while. So Irene and then Nana, maybe give us a little bit of an overview of what it was that we launched and what happened in Bonn and what's involved.
Thank you. I believe it's going to be Nettie that's speaking with me this round, but you two can decide.
We're gonna shoehorn Nana in just because I made a mistake on the rota that I forgot.
It's okay.
I started typing one N and instead of Nana coming out, Nettie came out. So
Okay.
but we'll have time for Nettie and Gopal to jump in also.
Okay. Well, as Fletcher said, there's not a silver bullet by which we can make a substantial contribution, but by deep cuts by households in energy consumption and emissions, we can stop using fossil fuels. However, scientists and policy makers find it hard to imagine that people will be prepared to make the changes implied in our ways of living. So at the climate conference in Bonn, about 80 leaders from a wide range of faith communities worldwide gathered in a joyous and moving event. It was on bicycles, to launch a new initiative in sustainable living. The following text is an extract from the Statement of Commitment, signed over by 150 high-level faith leaders, delivered to the negotiations at COP23 at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So here are these important few paragraphs from that document. As religious and spiritual leaders, we are committing to make changes in our own lives and to support the members of our communities in doing the same. Together, we come to you with an invitation to embark on a journey towards compassionate simplicity for the sake of the climate, the human family, and the community of life. For many of us, changes in 3 areas make the greatest impact: dramatically reducing emissions from our home energy use, adopting a plant-based diet and reducing food waste, and minimizing automobile and air travel. Because of the gravity of our situation, substantial and long-term changes in these areas are indispensable. If we are to reach 1.5 future, particularly for those of us in communities whose carbon footprints exceed sustainable levels, we pledge our commitment to such change. We wish to be clear that we understand the systemic change is required to solve this crisis. We will continue to advocate for the policies that are so urgently needed. However, we also believe that individual commitments and behaviors are as important in addressing climate change as they are in addressing poverty, racism, and other grave social ills. And we know that our spiritualities and traditions offer wisdom about finding happiness in a purposeful life, family, and friendships, not in an overabundance of things. The world needs such wisdom. It is our privilege both to share and to seek to embody it. Nettie or Nana, do you want to continue?
Yeah, thank you, Irene. So GreenFaith is managing this initiative in the early stage of the implementation with international interfaith steering committee, which consists the Bhumi Project, which is a Hindu environmental organization that Gopal is leading, and the Franciscan Action Network, the Global Catholic Climate Movement, the Global Muslim Climate Network, Hazon, a Jewish environmental group, One Earth Sangha, a Buddhist environmental organization, the World Evangelical Alliance, and the World Council of Churches. And together we will securing sustainable living pledges from the religious leader at all levels in an extensive range of faith communities, also providing training, mostly online, for sustainable living facilitators and leaders within the communities, and providing a directory of existing resources for sustainable living and support to faith communities in developing their own resources. And we plan to hold a weekend of celebration in September 2018, next year, involving events in local and national congregation, potentially including collaboration among faith groups, and with secular groups as well. And to deliver, of course, the important thing, a further statement of record, celebration, and commitment in COP24 in Katowice, Poland, in December, early December 2018, as Gopal has mentioned. So I think all these messages are very important, especially on a track towards the objective of Paris Agreement, and of course, like the agenda for sustainable development goals as well. So we are hoping that everyone, work together better, and also we hope to further and faster ahead together.
Nettie, perhaps you could share a little bit about the 2 events that we organized in Bonn, both the Daylong Symposium and then the delivery of the statement by bicycle, so that people get a little bit of a feel for that.
Okay, I'll do my best. Well, one thing I wanted to add with what Nana just mentioned is that, as we also presented in one of those long days, we had one very special, wonderful day where we invited, there were probably over 80 religious leaders and different faith communities represented. We have a day-long initiative where we presented this initiative, and we have an opportunity to hear people's responses, ideals, concerns about the initiative, and in hope too that their communities will get engaged in it, and we could build more momentum around the world. One of the things that was mentioned is that the reality too is that there are communities around the world, and it's my reality when I work with the immigrant community in the US and I reach out to Latin American folks, is that there are places in the world where people do not have an option to choose what they want to eat, how they want to transport themselves, or the energy. They may not even have access to energy. So we are hoping that this initiative, for those who are either struggling and looking for systematic changes so they could have an option to live a sustainable life, that could be empowering and a good tool to say, look, this is what we need for our communities. Or those who are already living a sustainable living to say, look, this is, they are following our example. Let's maintain where we are. So it could be empowering for them as well, no? So that's how this initiative is also being seen in other places around the world, and we hope that they will grab it and own it and get engaged in the possibilities behind the initiative, which the name is Walk Gently on Earth, o Caminando Suave con la Tierra. So we had that day-long event where we have different voices explaining how we talk about climate in our communities, what is within our own faiths that can support us, empower us to live a sustainable lives, what are those tokens, those tools that we've been given as part of our faith so we could do what God wants us to do as we live our lives on earth. And so it was a beautiful diversity of voices that we heard throughout the day. And then the next day, we launched the initiative by delivering it with bicycles. We drove maybe 3 or 4 miles from a church. We had a very beautiful interfaith service before to bless this initiative and to so we heard diverse voices, and together we rallied through bicycle, and there's some little carts that I don't remember the name, but we had some other people carry along other people in the back that could not ride bicycles, and we took it to the United Nations, and we gave it to the General Secretary, the UNFCCC, Patricia, her last name is Espinosa, thank you, from Mexico. So our declaration that you just heard from Irene was presented in her hand as our commitment to do our part as people of faith, to engage in what is necessary to maintain the 1.5 degrees centigrade level of global increase temperature. So to keep a control on climate change. So it was beautiful. I hope you can have access to that video that was produced to share that moment. I believe it's on the GreenFaith Facebook account. Maybe Fletcher can tell us more where you can also find it if there's in other places too. But anyway, it was very inspiring. Again, the voices of the people from Fiji and the Lone Lion Islands was very much heard and present throughout the 2 days. And so we come back very inspired and engaged in what's next.
I think one thing that I'll mention is that one of the most common questions we've received so far about this initiative is how we understand its relationship to advocacy and activism. And as Irene read in the portion of the statement that she read aloud, we're very clear that this is not a substitute for advocacy. Policy change, system level change is absolutely vital. We believe this is important for a couple of reasons. One is that first of all, the data shows that if the top 20% of consumers in the world were to reduce their carbon footprint to the size of the average EU citizen, that would create I believe it was a 25% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions on a global scale. So the fact of the matter is that by large-scale adoption of sustainable living commitments, that there really is a concrete difference that can be made. A second reason that we've decided to take this on is that we really do believe that as people of faith, that by taking this on, we're literally trying to internalize the same kind of challenges that we want society to engage as a whole. We believe that by making these commitments, it gives us a greater degree of integrity with which to conduct our advocacy. It will give us a sense of how we as individuals and within our congregations and synagogues and temples and mosques and sanghas can do this. It will create a sense of competence and ability to get these changes done. And then the third piece of the picture is that we think that just as we would never take seriously the split between sort of personal behavior and a collective perspective when it comes to racism or poverty, we don't think that we can afford to have that kind of split within our understanding of our relationship to the earth. So we're eager to move forward with this. We hope that all of you will be with us next September. We haven't yet chosen the exact date on which we'll have the Global Commitment Day, but we'll be publicizing that widely, and we'll look forward to having you with us for that. Couple of questions that have come in the meantime. One was there any discussion about initiative relating population and birth control, and citing a recent study? There was some discussion about that. What we've decided to do with this particular initiative is to focus on behaviors that everybody in some sense has the ability, that are universally applicable. And the issue of family life, of having another child, is something that's relevant to significant numbers of people, but not as broadly as diet and transportation and home energy use. And so we've decided to focus on those behaviors because they are the most significant ones we think that people will be willing to work on. And we'll share the fact about the about the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions related to behavior change by the biggest global greenhouse gas emitters on a household level. So want to have just a couple of moments. Gopal, Nettie, Nana, Irene, a last one or two sentences from each of you.
Just that, our gathering in Bonn was fantastic, but the launch of this initiative is very, very exciting. Religious traditions from across the world coming together to say that personal lifestyle changes and choice is central to addressing the climate crisis. It's just going to be a very exciting campaign, and looking forward to working with everyone on that over the next couple of years.
Right. Nettie?
Well, in the same tone as Gopal, I also came back very inspired and challenged. As I came back, I'm also trying to make my own more changes that I know I can do and need to do in order to live a 1.5 living lifestyle. And so, but again, it was also mentioned in that even though it may sound individualistic to decide, I decide whether I eat this or whether I transport myself this way or use this energy or not. The reality is that for us to make those changes, we need a community of support to make it happen. So that's why, even though it may sound individualistic in some ways, this is only possible if we come together as communities, if we have a community to support us, or support behind us to move forward. So that's all I would say.
Irene?
Hi. There's a Jewish song, Hine Matov, which is a song that says how good it is that we sit together and join together in unity. And that was my feeling coming out of this experience in Bonn, is how important it is that what Nettie was saying, that we do this in community, that we're doing it individually, but we're doing it as community, all the faith traditions together.
Great. Nana?
Yeah, I realized that as a global community, we need to increase our ambition and our action towards climate change, and we can do it from individual level as well as collectively as a community. So hopefully through that work together, we can, rise our ambition in reducing the greenhouse gases in the future. Then we can reach 1.5 degree level.
Great. And I'll wrap up. There are a couple of questions that have come in about other behaviors. And is this initiative open to other behaviors being included in the list of actions? And the way in which we're thinking about this is that we want to be encouraging people to pay attention to those behaviors that, first of all, they can control themselves, because this is sort of parallel to all of the other really vitally important advocacy work that many of us are involved in, and that we'll all plan to continue to be involved in. So we don't at all want to suggest that this is a replacement for advocacy. Rather, it's taking on an additional set of commitments around which we ourselves have agency. And so the criteria that we're using is because we want our efforts to make the biggest difference possible. We're going to focus on behaviors that make the biggest difference, and the research is pretty clear that the three that we've identified in terms of home energy use, moving towards a plant-based diet, and minimizing one's transportation footprint are three really big ticket items that make a disproportionately large impact. And so that's the rationale behind that. We know that in certain cases, there may well be some other behaviors that ought to be bumped up, and we absolutely welcome that. But the idea is to make the biggest impact possible in terms of changes that we ourselves as individuals will be making to accompany the advocacy commitments and advocacy efforts in which we are imploring and urging governments and corporations and other leaders to make changes in policy or to uphold certain policies or certain commitments. And we will be back in touch soon with more information about this. Again, a sort of a date to keep in mind is that next September, at the time of a Global Climate Action Summit in California, we will be looking together with all of you and our many, many partners on this to bring forward a really, we hope, very remarkably sized series of commitments from religious and spiritual leaders and their followers around the world. And we hope together to be able to make that contribution along with the contributions that we're all committed to in the area of advocating for stronger action at the governmental level. So many thanks to those of you who've been with us. Thanks to everybody who sent the questions in. It's great to be together in this kind of way. Thanks to Gopal and Nettie and Irene and Nana. And we'll sign off now, and we'll send out an email to everybody who's registered today with links for more information. So many thanks. Take good care, and we'll be in touch again soon. Bye-bye now.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye. Bye.